Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City, here is Steve Malzberg.
All right, folks, let me read you something. A Jew is that of that is most contemptible of religions, the most vile of faiths. They, both the ancient and modern Jew, are altogether the worst liars. They are the filthiest and vilest of peoples. Their unbelief horrid, their ignorance abominable. The vilest infidel ape. Do not consider that killing them, Jews, is treachery. Joining us now to talk about that is a man who wrote that in one of his recent books, but he's the most recent author of The Legacy of Jihad, Dr. Andrew Bostom, professor of medicine at Brown University. Hey, Doc.
How are you, Steve?
Always good to talk to you. You wrote a great piece, such a comprehensive piece at andrewbostom.org on your blog about rampant Islamic Jew hatred in Europe and the horrific shooting at the museum in Brussels, the Brussels Jewish Museum. And you start your piece with that. Tell us where those quotes are from, and then talk about the man who proudly did the shootings, and another victim just died the other day from that shooting.
Yes, well, shockingly to most people, who haven't delved into this rather morbid doctrine and history, is that those quotes come from two prominent Muslim writers and thinkers from the middle of the 11th century in Europe, in what's supposed to be the idealized period of, whatever, ecumenism under Islam, which a lot of modern-day jihadists would like us to go back to. That's the supposed wonderful period of Muslim Spain. And what the first one is Ibn Hazm, the second one is Abu Ishaq, a poet, and what they're doing, and what they did, unfortunately, with success, was incite mass anti-Jewish violence using these themes from canonical Islam. And in fact, they wiped out an entire Jewish community was wiped out in a massive pogrom in 1066. The same year that we learn about the Battle of Hastings. And it's very, very little known to non-specialists. But what I was trying to demonstrate was that this kind of hatred based on thematic elements from Islam is not new, period, and is not new even to Europe. So when Nemouche, the jihadist who had gone to Syria and was apparently quote unquote radicalized within the prison system in France, was captured, there was a lot of nonsense about this is a brand new phenomenon, and maybe we didn't educate the youth in Europe, the Muslim youth in Europe, about the Holocaust, and that's why this happened. And it had nothing to do with Islam, of course. We heard a French interior minister say. And, we're awash in this kind of ignorance and denial, and I just wanted to use this historical example from 1,000 years before to demonstrate that, no, unfortunately, this is deeply rooted in Islam. We also have the terrible phenomenon of Islam's effective Vatican. The Vatican of Sunni Islam is Al-Azhar University. And later on in the piece, I give examples of the past two grand imams. So those are like the papal equivalents in Sunni Islam, glorifying the worst anti-Semitic themes from the Quran and the traditions of Muhammad as the modern-day paradigm for how Muslims should deal with Jews. And I think, Steve, we have to come to grips with the fact that Islam hasn't had a Vatican II, and has not come to terms with its own viciously anti-Semitic doctrine.
All right, no, I couldn't agree with you more. But let's talk about this guy. And here's another one of the anti-Assad rebels, if you will, that the United States is giving weapons and giving support to, and hoping emerges victorious. And he's one of the guys who shot up the museum.
Yeah, this is a very, very dangerous phenomenon. You point out one aspect of this, of course, the American attachment to it, but the Europeans are tying themselves into knots even to determine whether, once these guys leave the country, they're debating whether they should let them back in, as if that should be a debate. I mean, they should be barred from re-entry. Period. I don't even know why this is a discussion once they go over there. And in fact, there are very, very dangerous things apparently taking place within the prison systems. I think it's much larger than just focusing on the prison systems in Europe. I think there's a lot of radicalization that's taking place via the mosques, via the internet. But in the prison system, apparently, is where he got his real, conversion dose. You can see him transform. I don't know if you guys have a picture of him, transformed into a bearded jihadist. And it was just horrible what they observed in prison when there was this jihadist rampage a couple of years ago by Mohammed Merah. That was the only time this jihadist, Mehdi Namouche, wanted a television set inside his cell. And he was jubilant at the vicious exploits of Merah, who attacked a Jewish school and killed a teacher and killed students there. Obviously there was a problem with this fellow.
Yeah, well, that goes without saying. How much of a threat do you believe in going forward today? These kinds of attacks are, at Jewish institutions throughout Europe.
Well, this is not my special area of expertise. I'm just reading the quote-unquote terrorism experts within Europe, within the European Union, and they're petrified. They make a conservative estimate that there may be 700, 800 Mehdi Namouche types that have gone overseas. How many of them are willing to calmly and coldly walk up to institutions like the Brussels Jewish Museum and gun people down? We don't know. But again, the European Union officials that monitor this are very, very frightened, very concerned, and also say that they can't imagine how he's just somehow a lone wolf, that he had to have some sort of logistical support. It seemed to me that they were implying logistical support not only from Syria, but somehow in the networks in Europe.
What gets me is you would think, it almost seems like these animals are sidetracked. Someone who would hate Jews enough to go do what he did at the museum in Brussels, with Assad or wherever they are, or with what's going on, and the Muslim versus Muslim killings that go on, and there's so much happening for a terrorist, for a violent jihadist or whatever to be occupied with, as this man was.
Yes.
What is it, do you believe, that turns his focus to the attention of killing Jews? Is it the Quranic verses? Is it the ancient Islamic writings? Is it that indoctrination as we see today in the Palestinian schools and TV? Is it that kind of indoctrination from early on that leads to this?
I think it's a combination of all those things. In other words, the ultimate validation, the ultimate rationalization, unfortunately, comes from these unreformed themes within the Quran, within the traditions of Muhammad. There's also the historical application of the Sharia to the Jews, and Israel represents the complete abrogation of those. In other words, the Quran tells Muslims that the Jews are to be permanently abased and humiliated and effectively living under the Sharia. And Israel turns that paradigm on its head. It's an independent state, obviously outside the Sharia, living according to its vision for its own people. That's anathema to Islam. But you're right. The whole conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Muslims in the territories and in the neighboring countries is an endless source of incitement. It's all melded together, I would argue, but it's an endless source of incitement, and it's particularly virulent amongst the Muslim community in Europe, abetted, as I also point out, by this very bizarre utopian idea that somehow the cultures of Europe and North Africa could be melded together. I think a lot of that was venal to get oil wealth and manpower and stuff. But it turned into this perverse philosophy. And I included, Steve, in the article, a map that actually turns the Mediterranean upside down. In other words, the southern shore of Europe is now the bottom, and what's really the south, the North African coast of the Mediterranean, is on top. And that was the vision of the Muslim cartographers in the Middle Ages, That's now the vision that was on top of this document from 2003 about this cultural symbiosis, as if Europe was basically submitting to an order that was envisioned in the Middle Ages. It's almost too bizarre to contemplate.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, always great to talk to you. You are one of the few who keep the word out and are not afraid to speak your mind and tell it as you see it, and I appreciate that, and that's why we like talking to you. Dr. Andrew Bostom, professor of medicine at Brown University and author of so many books, including The Legacy of Jihad. Thank you, sir. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
All right, you too. Yep. You know, we've come a long way, and in many respects, we haven't come that far at all, especially when it comes to the hatred for Jews throughout the Muslim world and in many parts of Europe and all over.